we'll do the live thing first. Like, hey everybody, welcome back to the Bigmark podcast. It's me, your host, Bigmark. If it's your first time listening, welcome. If not, welcome back. Like I always say, if you ever want to reach out to the podcast for any reason, let us know. If you want to hear about a new topic, or you want to let us know how you feel about one of the episodes. I know if you have already, and thank you so much for hitting us up in the comments. You know, I hope to see more back and forth. I know in a couple episodes I've seen a few people chatting it up in the comments, not on all of them, but like I said, hit us up there or in the comments, or sorry, in the DMs, also in the comments and in the comments. But also in the DMs on our Instagram or X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, the Bigmark Pod or at the Bigmark Podcast. Again, thank you all for being here. This is the best way you can possibly support the podcast, by watching, listening, however you're taking in the podcast. But you being here is the best thing. If you want to go the extra step, hit the like button, subscribe to the channels wherever you're watching, follow along on Spotify or Apple Music, wherever you're listening. And again, check it out. There's video now on Spotify, and there's video on YouTube, so go check those out if you want to see this mug here. But again, thank you so much for being here. You could, if you really want to go that extra mile, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. There's a couple ways you can donate and keep the lights on, so to speak. Anyway, thank y'all for joining us tonight. We're going to be talking about a new book that I just finished, that I was kind of powering through just because I wanted to talk to you guys about it. A new book by Daniel J. Levitin, his latest book, written in 2024, Penguin Random House. It's called I Heard There Was a Secret Chord, Music as Medicine. Check that out there, folks. Really great book. It also is available in audiobook, wherever you get your audiobooks. It was a gift from my buddy Bunce at work. Yo, shout out Bunce if you're listening or watching. Thank you, brother. I am a mort, and I don't really read that much. I usually listen to most of the books, like I've talked about on this podcast. But so as soon as I got this, I was like, fuck, I'm going to listen to the audiobook and just get it in me. However, looking at the physical copy now that I was just like making some notes on tonight, there's a lot of cool diagrams and chord notations and stuff. And I mean, I want to say this to all my listeners, because, I'm sure most of you guys are into music and stuff if you're a fan of the Bigmark podcast. But if you're a musician yourself, this book is great. But even if you're not, I find Dan, the author, is really great at kind of really providing a really approachable, understandable explanation of some more complicated musical theory ideas, and also complicated neuroscience terms and ideas and theories and what have you. I mean, of course, as a musician and coming from my kinesiology background, and neuroscience and sports psychology, this book obviously speaks to me. And I read one of Daniel's other books called This Is Your Brain on Music, which is like a classic. I've quoted that book probably a million times. Really wonderful look at, which actually is one of the second chapters in this book. It kind of goes over some of that stuff a little bit. So even if you haven't read This Is Your Brain on Music, this is also a great book to just get into that if you're not super interested, even though it is still, This Is Your Brain on Music is also super approachable. I find I Heard There Was a Secret Chord is really interesting, because it's generally speaking, it's a lot more focused on, again, music as medicine, musical therapies, and the way music interacts with our brain in that sense, mental health wise and other ways. We'll kind of go into that a little bit. I just wanted to kind of go through the book. I didn't really know how else to kind of dive into it, because it is pretty, like, there's a lot, it's pretty dense with information, but again, it's presented in such a great way. He kind of opens the book with talking about human beings as a musical species, and I think there's some species. I think there's something so inherently true about that, is that we are a musical species. We are this, this type of person, this type of species, if you will, that we make music on a relatively consistent basis. I mean, not every person is necessarily a musician, but most people out there like music or can listen to music. Maybe there's some people that don't love it as much as others, and maybe it's more situational, and maybe they don't listen to it constantly, like some people. But like, you know, there's something to that where it's like human beings, I mean birds, and like there's other animals that communicate through song and things like that, most likely. You know, we're one of the only one of the only species, I should say, that creates music for pleasure and for entertainment. I know at some points in our species we might have used it, you know, as and still do, as like a way to communicate in a certain way, or, you know, when you're working, keep tempo. I know I've seen all types of movies, and, you know, unfortunately, you know, they're not always of the best subject matter, but chain gangs, or like guys rowing boats and there's like a chant going on or something like that, or a really rhythmic song. You know, I've been working on the railroad type song to keep you in rhythm with your menial task, or breaking rocks, or smashing railroad spikes, or rowing boat in some type of Roman centurion situation. But again, we mostly make music for entertainment, and as Dan has mentioned in this book and other books, human beings have a even closer tie with music, because at some point humans were more involved with the actual creation of the music. It was everyone in smaller tribes, as you know, they've looked back anthropologically. Smaller tribes, everyone created music. Everyone was banging a rock on a stick, or banging a stick on a log, or doing whatever they're doing, and singing and chanting. Obviously, that was our first instrument, was our voice. And you know, all that kind of stuff together. And it was everyone. No one was necessarily considered a musician, probably because everyone could just make music and enjoy it. And at some point in our history, we broke away from that tradition and started exalting people who are better musicians than others, or people realized how much effort it does take to become a proficient musician, let alone a prolific musician, let alone, you know, some of these musicians that we consider the greats, and the, you know, even throughout human history, you know, go back as far as we know, as long as there's been written music. I mean, obviously before that, how could we ever know who wrote the music if it was just all oral? But, you know, classic Beethoven, all that stuff. But even Greeks and stuff, there's, and Egyptians, there's like images, and there's ways, and you know, different scholars have tried to figure out ways to actually read that music, because that's another thing, is that throughout the world, human beings kind of have different approaches with music and different scales, and it's all cultural and all this stuff. But this is all kind of wrapped up in this idea of that we are this musical species, and it's extremely important. Music plays an extremely important role in human lives, right? And I think that maybe this is a chicken and the egg scenario, but our brains are essentially set up for this. You know, music only does exist in our head, if you really think about it. You know, music, even you listening to my voice right now, if you're listening on headphones or listening to any type of speaker, there's a speaker with a membrane that can vibrate, and that vibration is disturbing the air, and that's sending that air disturbance towards your ear. Your ear has a little tiny its own hearing mechanism. Your inner ear, if we've all heard about that, is, you know, a set of bones and a little tiny membrane that vibrates as well, and that's interacting with the disturbance in the air, and then that's moving these little tiny bones, and it goes down this little tiny snail-like looking feature structure, and that sends it down a nerve, which goes into our brain, and then we interpret all that music. It all comes from these fucking little like not microscopic, but they're very, very small bones. Like, if you ever actually saw them, they're small. Like, I'm trying to find something in here that I could even compare it to. Very small. slightly larger than the head of a pin. Like I said, you can see it, but they're small. And then again, it's on that membrane, and there's like these little hair follicle cells that are inside that snail-like structure, the cochlea, and the way the cochlea is shaped, it's like I said, a snail, so it's a spiral. But if you were able to stretch that spiral out straight, at one end it would be thick, and at the other end it would be very thin. One thick and strong, the other thin and brittle, and essentially you hear along this membrane, and the closer at the end is the higher frequencies, and the bottom is the lower frequencies. And again, that all gets interpreted and sent down your auditory nerve into your auditory brain regions, which interpret Broca and Wernicke's areas, which interpret speech and music, I guess, in the sense, but speech comprehension and language comprehension, and those are all involved. And anyway, this is what can happen. You start to get into these brain regions, and I'm sure some of you have already fallen asleep. But like I said, Daniel's book, at least, Daniel does a much better job at kind of easing you into some of these more, specific brain regions. And it's not so much about remembering what they're called, it's about knowing what they do, or at least understanding what they do in the context of how our brain interprets music, right? And music is such a widespread, like, cognitively demanding exercise. Like if you're creating music, like if you're playing music yourself, it's using a lot of parts of the brain, right? Like, especially if you're actively reading music, playing it, you're using obviously your vision, your vision, period. You're using your memory to remember how to play your instrument. You're using obviously all your motor cortex and all that fun stuff to actually move and play the stuff. Again, if you're singing, there's all the same cognitive load that it takes just to speak. That's also there. How you're breathing, your emotions into it. It's a full body, full brain exercise. If you're playing drums, you're doing that, and you're also trying to split your brain and trying to autopilot and doing one thing, and it's like chewing gum and patting your head and rubbing your stomach and doing all that stuff all at once. And that's just, your brain is just on fire, which again, this is all the reasons why playing an instrument does benefit the brain, because you're just using so many regions. And, through a lot of neuropsychological kind of experiments and observation, scientists and researchers have found that when you are listening to music, at least, or playing music, whatever it is, interacting with music, it is passing through all the most important computational and emotional centers in the brain. So it's completely all connected, right? It's Daniel talks about how music and your memory are connected, and it's really interesting. Emily Wood, who was a guest here on the podcast, she's at McMaster University. Go and check her episode out. Really cool, actually. We were kind of talking about how the brain has a procedural memory when it's attached to music, where sometimes if someone asks you, hey, like, sing your favorite song right now, if you're not or maybe not a favorite song, but sing the song that you know, maybe you're not going to remember all the words right away, but if you start singing the words, maybe some of them will start to come to you, and you'll start to remember them more, or you start hearing the music itself, and that starts reminding you of all this stuff, right? So music and your memory kind of work really hand in hand. And again, like I said, there's musicians out there that have to remember all this stuff, like we were talking about earlier. It's you are using the memory to even just remember how to play your instrument. But then if you're a musician who is like in a cover band, I mean, shout out Carl, our previous producer. He's in a band called Freedom Train, and they said they know like 10,000 songs or something crazy. It's like something nuts like that. And like, I don't know if they actually like do, or they have to prepare a little bit, but like, I guess they just have a book you can just fucking pick from, because it's just like, I don't even know. It's nuts, right? So anyway, from that musical memory, Dan also kind of goes into how music plays a role with your attention, right? And, I think a lot of people use music in their life when they're doing things and whatever, driving and working around the house or working on a project, doing schoolwork, doing whatever. And it does help in a lot of senses with your attention. There are most cases, most experiments when there's no music, attention and there's a place with a lot of other distractions, your mind can kind of wander. But I think in some of these studies anyway, they were talking about how music and things like that can help you at least get a little bit more pleasure out of super menial tasks, right? But these are super menial tasks that you're not necessarily using a lot of brain power. This is where music is nice. But bottom line is, and I hate to say it because I used to listen to music all the time, but it was kind of funny. I hate to digress. Let me talk about that in a sec. Basically, when I was in university, I used to listen to music all the time. I remember talking to a study helper once back in high school, and I think he or she, I can't remember. They said classical music is good to listen to because there's no lyrics, and I kind of took that to heart. And I used to listen to a lot of classical music in high school for sure. I listened to a lot of classical music while I was studying, and again that really helped me focus essentially because there was no. I was wearing headphones most of the time, which I think helped with extraneous. I probably could have just been wearing noise canceling headphones, just like normal ones you wear on a job site. But having the music there, was somewhat soothing, I guess, but also no lyrics. So you can't really get confused. Cause I found I definitely couldn't listen to rap. That was out of the question. Cause that's very lyrics heavy music. It's very based around the way the spoken word. Anyway. So I couldn't do that, but there were some albums and some music that I could listen to, and I basically had to listen to just that over and over. So it's kind of funny, in my university days, I have certain albums that I listened to during those study periods that as soon as I hear those albums again, I'm just transported back. Maybe not necessarily listen to remember the exact subject matter that I was studying, even though maybe if I was listening to that and you quizzed me, it might actually help, like we were talking about memory, it might actually help jog that if I'm listening to that album and you start asking me what I was studying maybe while I was listening to that, or what year I was listening to that, blah, blah, blah. But I felt like I could push a little bit farther. But bottom line is, unfortunately, and I hate to break it to everyone, like I was saying before, Dan says it's no good for when you're really do not listen to music when you're doing a really focused task, a task that is demanding of your attention and your focus. Music isn't going to be beneficial, unfortunately. Maybe that doesn't say don't listen to it, but it's not going to actually help you as much as you think. And it's kind of funny because that flows right into Dan talking about the default mode network. He talks about the brain's default mode and how it can actually help you get into more introspection and more of a meditative state, in fact. And so if you've never heard of the brain's default mode, the default mode network is essentially a collection of distributed and interconnected brain regions that are suppressed when a person is focused on something in the external environment. So essentially it's all these different brain regions that shut down while you are just zoning out. I guess that zoning out feeling, or meditative extreme calm, no real, you are so focused on the external, nothing else is, nothing else. I mean, fortunately, hopefully you're not driving and talking on your phone, but maybe you lose sight of something on the road because you're on your phone, because that's where your attention is, and it shuts down other parts of the body that the brain is essentially just deeming unnecessary. And a lot of studies are showing that the default mode network is in the on position, if you will, while you're completely zoned in to the thing. So if it's stuck in the off position, it's really hard for you to chill out and relax. You're always staying attended to something. But when it's stuck in the on position, that's when you're just relaxed on a beach, chilling out, cooling out. And everyone kind of wants to get to that, right? And it's kind of funny. Music is a way to actually help get into that state. And it can actually help us get into a meditative state. And I used to say music is my mantra, which was kind of a super corny ass way to say music is meditation. And I find that, you know, it has a calming effect, and there is something about listening to music that is just like, it helps you focus. It helps you think about certain things, at least, if you want to stay focused or not. And I think that's the thing about the default mode network, is that it's shutting down these parts. It's your brain, again, is deeming these parts unnecessary in the moment. You know, they're on autopilot. You're going to breathe, your heart's going to pump, all that fun stuff. You're going to chill there. But if you can do that, you know, you're giving a lot of your brain a rest, because when those other parts are demanding your attention, it's a cognitive load. I mean, when they say attention, when they're talking about attention and they say pay attention, what you're actually paying attention with is glucose. That is what your body is using to power your brain. So you will actually use more energy and more glucose in the body the more you are using your brain. Funny enough. Obviously, music is associated with, you know, as a therapy. It's going to be associated with many different pathologies and ailments that surround the brain, and the brain's relationship with the body, right? So there's movement and movement disorders. The way the music interrelates with movement, like we've talked about, is huge. Like I was talking about, as a drummer, you are using so many different parts of your body and your brain at the same time. It's extremely demanding on the brain, right? And there's so many different regions from the cerebellum to the motor cortex to all these different regions of the brain that are responsible for movement, that are just in overdrive, right? So a lot of people that have disorders in a lot of those parts of the brain, they find that music actually does help stimulate those regions, which may not be accessible through some other pathways. Let's just put it that way. You know, like we said before, music is so diffuse through the brain, the way it travels through the brain. We're not really actually sure how much and how many parts are truly interacting and speaking with each other. We just know that your brain just fires up and it lights up like a Christmas tree on all those fMRI and all those topography machines and all these types of shits. So they think that, and this goes for most of brain disorders and brain things, your brain is extremely plastic. It does have the capability of rewiring itself, period. It's able to do that. Sometimes it has to be through relatively creative methods. And by using music, maybe we can kind of find these other pathways that are untrodden or inaccessible by just talking to a patient or giving them drugs or giving them whatever. So again, multiple sclerosis, Huntington's, speech pathology, Parkinson's disease. These are all these diseases and disorders that music can help with, right? Like, and Dan goes into it heavy duty in his book. It also goes into trauma and how much that helps. And not only as an escape, but music has lyrics. It has poetry attached to it. It's so special that modern Western music, at least if you speak English, there's so many layers to the way music actually interacts with you emotionally, right? Like, it is the sound of music, you know, just music alone, no lyrics is enough to move people to tears, to joy, to, you know, anything, whether it's just evoking a memory or actually, you know, creating that feeling somehow. You know, music is capable of doing that, again, on top of it with the lyrical content too. Like, there's songs that have beautiful lyrical content, poetry even, that, you know, I'm a huge Tragically Hip fan, you know, Nirvana lyrics. I mean, I name a million different bands, obviously, that have beautiful lyrics. Joni Mitchell stuff, like, whatever, Bob Dylan, Neil Young, you know, whatever. I can talk forever. That has musical and cultural and significant emotional impact on so many people. and they've touched thousands, millions of people. There's, through album sales or live music and all this stuff, let alone, I haven't even touched on live music, how much that can affect you. Even just hearing that music loud and hitting you, like people go to EDM concerts and they feel that beat and it, man, not to digress again, but the human brain, man, it's a physical structure. There's just, neurons and synapses firing in there, and there's neurochemicals and hormones flying around. Who's to say that some of these vibrations aren't somehow interacting with some of those brain regions and letting loose a little bit more dopamine or a little bit more wherever, serotonin or whatever it is, shaking things loose, whatever it might be, My buddy used to be super into listening to like binaural beats, like tones and things. And I was always like, I don't know if that's scientifically or like physiologically proven, but every object has a resonance frequency, its own resonance frequency, that if like, it's like when an opera singer sings next to a wine glass and the glass shatters, she found the tone that object resonates with, and it can resonate and vibrate. And I mean, in the case of glass, it breaks, but it sympathetically vibrates with that tone. And it happened to some bridge. I don't think it was the actual Golden Gate Bridge, but it was some bridge that they built, and it was like where they made all the rings for the engineers from. But anyway, it like reached that terminal frequency or whatever the fuck they call it, and it just like vibrated itself to bits. So if that's happening in the physical world, who's to say that's not happening at a microscopic level as well? And maybe loosening some chains, if you know what I mean. Anyway, so who knows, how much that affects. And that's the thing, is that how much music can touch you that way through the physical frequencies of the music, and let alone the emotional and intellectual impact of some of these lyrics. I mean, you listen to some songs, they tell stories, man, like whatever genre it might be. I can think of a million, but that tell amazing stories and can incite new ideas that, might not get across if you just are telling people or sitting at a podium, right? Music only exists up here. Like I said, it only exists in your head. And sometimes when you're listening to it, it almost helps not to see the artist or see who they are. That's nice, whatever, but it's supposed to exist here. It's supposed to exist here. MTV was kind of fucky. Yes, it's cool to see our artists do their thing, but go see them live. Who cares if they're hot or if they can be in a music video? They make beautiful music that makes you move. Who cares what they look like? But if you can just listen to them, and I remember listening to so many bands as a kid, especially like classic rock bands that didn't have music videos and things. I had no idea what all these guys looked like, and it didn't matter. It all existed up here. Anyway, from trauma to mental health, memory loss, dementia, Alzheimer's, stroke, there's so many stories of patients being brought out of not comas necessarily, comas I guess, but catatonic states, and severe Alzheimer's where people can barely remember themselves or others, and music just completely brightens their whole day and completely brings them into it. They start remembering, or they start moving like they never had before. It's beautiful. It's amazing. Like, oh my gosh, I feel like as myself as a musician is one of the reasons why, if I could ever touch someone that way, let alone someone who is in such, like, because essentially a lot of these people who are trapped in their disease, they're still kind of aware in there, more or less. It's just there's a break between themselves and the external world usually. Not for every case in some of these disorders, but a lot of these like kind of locked in disorders, man. Like sometimes music can kind of bust them out, and that's amazing for pain, and it can be a distraction in some ways, and again help rewire the brain. That's the most important thing. And then neurodevelopmental disorders, I think it's huge too. It's kind of funny. Music itself is, if anything, one of the best forums, if you will. I don't know, best places for people with like what is it? No, neurotypical is normal. Neurodivergent people to exist. I mean, many musicians are neurodivergent. I mean, from one aspect to the other, a lot of people are on the autistic spectrum, and because it lends itself to the practice and repetition and obsession sometimes, not to put too heavy of a word on it, but persistent attention it does take to get to a certain level of musicianship. It makes sense for a lot of people to get into it, and if music becomes your career, then you actually have a way to be successful while being, again, not neurotypical as they say, right? So it's really, really special. And I think Dan also took a really great opportunity, I think, in this book to kind of also talk about the real meaning of music and the theories behind that. And he kind of comes up with it. He goes into it, and you have to kind of read it as a whole, but kind of talks about how much music can really move us, and how much it does really mean, and like why you should say, hey, this is something that does deserve our funding and things like this. It does provide value to the human race, and if we are looking at that large picture, we should be funding schools for music programs. We should be educating people as a whole, as a democracy, as a country, because it is important. And it, at the end of the day, music and any art, I think, and I agree with Dan, it's there to express an emotion. You're trying to bring the inside out. You're trying to bring what's inside your head and your heart, and you're trying to bring it out into the real world. I think that's visual art, photography, music, art, all these, every art form does this. But in music's case, it has this authentic expression of emotion that is a little bit of a shorter route. It's a shorter route of all those different things, whether it's literature, you have to write it out and make sure it all makes sense and try to explain, whether it's painting and you're trying to say, you're showing it, sculpture, it exists in this real world. You have to be like, this is what it is. And especially if you're doing like hyper realist, it has to look like what it's supposed to look like. But music doesn't have to. It doesn't exist in the real world. It only exists here. And whether someone's singing or playing an instrument, that instrument becomes an extension of themselves, and it's not a far route from what I'm experiencing in my head to what I'm trying to give to you. And I think we're all chasing that authenticity, that authentic expression of emotion, like I said. And that encapsulates this whole idea of the theory of musical meaning, is that it is so important to us that I don't think we can live without it. I think it's so, so, so important. And I do want to leave you all with a little reading here, actually. I'll see what we can do here. I tried to take a couple snippets from the last chapter of Dan's book here, chapter 16, Music, Medicine, Mystery, and Possibility, but I couldn't help myself. So I'm just going to read it to you. Here's a puzzle. Musical taste is highly subjective, ranging from Gregorian chant to jazz, rock, hip-hop, heavy metal, country, ad infinitum. How is it that different people can listen to Keith Jarrett, J.S. Bach, Selena Gomez, or Snoop Dogg and all have the same emotional experience? Well, first, do they? Yes. MRI scans show that neural activity increases significantly in the brain's pleasure centers, regardless of the genre, so long as the listener likes the music. In one study of younger adults I conducted, 17% of listeners reported having a transcendent experience, a feeling of being in touch with a higher power, while listening to religious music, and 15% were listening to hip-hop or rap, with the others finding that experience in alternative music, ambient, classical, metal, R&B, soul, EDM, and other genres. So then, what is it that actually gives rise to these experiences? Music is a uniquely powerful combination of elements that coalesce in a way that impacts a wide range of The therapeutic music capacities model, developed by neuroscientist William Ford Thompson of Macquarie University in Sydney, provides a framework for understanding how music can improve physiological and physical outcomes, psychological and physical outcomes, boost immune system function, and treat motor and behavior functions in people with neurological disorders. Music's capacities, he says, lie in its potential to be engaging, emotional, social, physical, personal, coordinating, and persuasive. Each is like a strand of a rope. They all work together such that trying to isolate their individual contributions is not just difficult, but misguided. Much research over the past 100 years has attempted to decompose music into elements to study their individual effects. Are there particular frequencies that move us? Is a certain combination of notes that we will always find pleasing, or mathematically described rhythm that makes us want to dance to hit the dance floor? To attempt to underestimate music's sway over us, looking at these components is like looking at tiny dabs of paint that make up the Mona Lisa and trying to account for why we find the painting so engaging. It's not the parts, nor does it even mirror some of them. Think for a moment about the last time you saw a river. Not the cover of Bruce Springsteen's album for the first time, of the same name. Not the image you have of boys throwing rocks by the bank or a tugboat down by the river, don't you know, in Mac the Knife. But an actual churning, glistening, splashing river. There is something intrinsically magnificent and captivating about rivers. A psychologist or neuroscience could set out to study what it is about that particular river that makes it so appealing. But they'll take a bucket of a river water and bring it back to the laboratory. But at that very moment, it ceases being a river. It's just a bucket of river water. In the same way, when we take individual rhythms and pitches, maybe a trumpet blast or a bass line there, out of the musical performance, all we have are... in the same way, when we take individual rhythms and pitches, maybe a trumpet blast here or a bass line there, out of the musical performance, all we are left with is a bucket full of notes. No movement, no flowing. The magnificent thing we had is no longer alive. Scarlet billows oozing musical life spill all over the ground. Whatever it is in music that is engaging, emotional, or social, for instance, is not a building block. It is the end product of a number of different elements coming together to make it so. In other words, the elements that coalesce are not in themselves engaging, but they create something engaging through their unique combination, through an epiphenomenon, one that involves indeed requires you to be a part of the experience. As David Pettis said, the act of creation is not complete unless and until a person engages with it. Music begins with 3 atomic elements: frequency, duration, and amplitude. That then becomes interpreted and remapped by the brain onto attributes such as pitch, melody, harmony, timbre, rhythm, and meter. And those attributes in turn are combined and interpreted as qualities that move us. That latter step of combining and interpreting is dependent on a number of factors such as our mood state, culture, experience, or previous exposure, immediate surroundings, environment, short and long-term memories, plus some random factors. The stimulus of music then is gestalt, is engaging, emotional, social, physical, personal, coordinating, and persuasive. One unique aspect of our brain's processing of pitch is that it produces a multidimensional cognitive structure out of the single dimension of frequency, creating complex tonal relations such as the circle of fifths, octave equivalents, and intervallic consonants. I've come to believe that when we find music so mentally, physically, and spiritually engaging because it stimulates such a higher dimensional thinking, modeled by 6 orthogonal dimensions. If the physicists are right, string theory says that we live in a 10-dimensional universe, and that all we see of its projection of flattening onto the 4 dimensions of length. Sorry, I'm going to read that whole thing again. I've come to believe that we find music so mentally, physically, and spiritually engaging because it stimulates such higher dimensional thinking, modeled by 6 orthogonal dimensions. If physicists are right, string theory says that we live in a 10-dimensional universe, and that all we see of it is its projection of flattening onto the 4 dimensions of length, width, height, and time. This suggests that music may be one thing in our world that allows us to visit these higher dimensional spaces. Oh my God. This suggests that music may be the one thing in our world that allows us to visit these higher dimensional spaces, and moreover, have them make intuitive and visceral sense to us. The ability music has to engage us wholly and completely is one of its reasons it can be such a powerful therapeutic agent. For it is out of a loss of the sense of self that we can achieve true healing and reintegration. I began this book with the story of being so engaged with music at the Keystone Center in San Francisco, listening to Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, that I was thrown into a state of experiential fusion. This miraculous transformative and transportation is available to all of us who are open to it, and to all who will let it in. It can occur even when we hear a piece of music for the first time, as Richard Powers describes in his novel Orfeo. Young Peter props up on his elbows, ambushed by a memory from the future. The shuffled half scales gathered mass. It sucks up other melodies into gravity. Tunes and countertunes split off and replicate, chasing each other in a cosmic game of tag. At 2 minutes, a trapdoor opens underneath the boy. The first floor of the house dissolves above a gaping hole. Boy, stereo speaker boxes. The love seat he sits on all hang in place, floating on the gusher of sonority pouring into the room. A memory from the future. Art has great power to change the way we see the world, our friends, ourselves. The power of art is that it can connect us to one another and to larger truths about what it means to be alive and what it means to be human. While music can increase empathy overall and on the average, that doesn't mean that it always will in every case. Penicillin doesn't cure every infection because some bacteria become antibiotic resistant. Sadly, then, there are exceptions. Hitler loved Wagner, and neither could be said to have been empathetic individuals. Yet music holds a special place among the arts because unlike painting or sculpture, it manifests across time. Literature is manifest across time as well. But if we are the ones doing the reading, the timing is up to us. If our minds wander while reading, we lose our place and have to go back. Music carries with it in its own internal capacity for moving us. Music carries within it its own internal capacity for moving us forward in time without any additional effort. If our minds wander while listening to music, it keeps going, taking us with it. And unlike these other art forms, our brains can perceive music even when our brains are wandering. One might say that the highest form of immersion of music is when we concede control of our thoughts. The Canadian literary theorist Northrop Frye wrote, "The fundamental purpose of the imagination in ordinary life is to produce, out of the society we live in, a vision of the society we want to live in." Conductor Kent Nagano elaborates, "This is why the arts are and always have been so essential to humanity, and why people gather to celebrate festivals and make music. Why they surrender to the poetic and get lost in the infinite beauties and the so magically whimsical excitements of nature and life." Questions about the importance of music are particularly pertinent now, in this time of political, economic, and social stress. The fine arts are under threat. Their importance is questioned. Their contribution to societal development is generally undervalued. Nagano continues, "The arts are, by definition, exercises in and manifestations of creative imagination. Healthy societies grow in response to the changing needs of their people and changing circumstances of the world. In order for any society to build a world having the values and qualities in which it would like to live, you must first imagine it. Only then can you build it." Frye goes further and postulates that unless we engage with the arts, we will raise an entire generation of citizens who have not had the opportunity to train their imagination. This will result, he says, in your inability to live in the kind of world you wish for. In order to have this world, you must effectively imagine what kind of world could possibly exist and then construct the blueprints in your imagination. Using our imaginations as we do when we engage with the arts encourages tolerance. In the imagination of our own beliefs are also only possibilities, but we can also see the possibilities in beliefs of others, Nagano says. He continues, "Bigots and fanatics seldom have any use for the arts because they are so preoccupied with their beliefs and actions that they can't imagine anything else as possibilities. What exactly is the kind of person that the business world of today wants? They should be social, communicative, approachable, thoughtful, self-reflexive, value-oriented, disciplined, empathetic, attentive, and capable of making professional, personal, and ethical judgments. Naturally, no one is required to play the piano, nor do you have to be a member of the orchestra or a painter or dancer. However, in order to be valued by our economy today, at some point, a person must have dealt with existential questions and thought about themselves and their environment, that which humanist disciples have at their core. That which humanist disciplines have at their core. And where does such thinking take place? Almost exclusively in the permanent examination of the art of music, literature, philosophy, and painting. Without imaginative thinking, our social structures would collapse upon itself. Leadership would become increasingly dictatorial. Empathy, like imagination, needs to be developed through experience, through practice. Our children are instinctively hungry for it. Music stimulates, develops, and feeds the imagination. In this, we can all learn from Beethoven. The basis of his creative mastery, Nagano continues, lies in his ability to take two or more elements of sharply contrasting character and place them directly against each other. These elements may include an energetic, forceful one against a melodic one, a rhythmically active, driving one against a singing, lyrical one, the rapid, agitated one against a calmer one, or brightly colored tonality against a darker, more brooding one. Beethoven creates worlds of opposites, of opposing forces that somehow harmoniously work together. It is within his works that questions about societal harmony are negotiated through the metaphor of acoustical harmony. The German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer viewed music as not merely a representation of the world, as other arts might be. It does not simply replicate or echo the patterns we observe around us, but is an expression of the very will that drives everything in our corporeal and metaphysical worlds. This distinction elevates music to a plane where it becomes not a mirror, but a window, a conduit into the deepest recesses of existence. It's akin to suggesting that music has its own intentional stance, evoking responses from us because it aligns with fundamental laws of nature. A philosopher and polymath, Gottfried Lieben, said, "Musica est exercitum arithmeticae occultum nescientis se numere animae." Sorry, my Latin isn't great. But what I just said is, music is a hidden arithmetic exercise of the soul, which does not know that it's counting. It's a mesmerizing hypothesis, and while one might be tempted to dissect it with the sharp tools of neuroscience and evolutionary psychology, there remains an ineffable allure to the idea that music might indeed tap into something primal, universal, and profoundly mysterious, and that mystery is delivered by music's inherent ambiguity. Ambiguity in music isn't an error in our cognitive apparatus, but a feature that pulls us into a deeper state of introspection. It toys with our evolutionary ancient pattern-seeking instincts, challenging us to discern meaning in a medium that is entirely a subjective mental construct, such that no single fixed and objective meaning exists. According to Schopenhauer, this taps into the fluidity of will resisting fixedness, and thus engaging our minds and feelings in the deepest and most profound ways. I think of music as a stream that endlessly branches with each new listening into new tributaries or distributaries. Indeed, listening to an old, well-known performance can yield an even richer set of new branchings, taking the mind to new vistas and cognitive emotional landscapes, all from the same original source. Instead of presenting a straightforward narrative, music offers a dynamic interplay of sound, structure, and meaning, continually prompting our brains, at the millisecond level, to adjust and reinterpret. Instead of invoking a single linear pathway of comprehension, the ambiguities present multiple neural routes of interpretation. This stimulates neuroplasticity, growth of new brain pathways, and healing or rerouting of damaged ones. Ultimately, music can do so many things because it can mean so many things. It is intentionally ambiguous. It does not explicitly refer to any concrete object in the world. It refers to metaphorical objects and emotional ones. It is rich with possibilities for personal interpretation. We can choose to like or reject a piece of music, to fall in love with it, to tire of it. It can take on different meanings as our brains change, as we react to the intricacies of life, love, memories, and relationships. And it is among the most intimate of art forms. Visual art, like anything we see, and due to the way our retina evolved, always seems out there in the world. Sound, like taste, feels like it's inside our heads. Inside of us. Shut your eyes after viewing a painting, and you may get an afterimage for 30 seconds. Stop listening to a piece of music, and it can replay in your head for as long as you like. I've never heard of someone who gets painting stuck in their heads, although I imagine some do. But earworms, those snippets of music that rattle around in your brain, are reported by 90% of the population. Once music gets in there, it stays in there. Music is, at its heart, both communal and intensely private at the same time. What other human activity can be experienced with tens of thousands of others and feel so personal? Earlier, I said that in the search for the substantive universals that underlie the power of music, we have the harmonic series, related to physical acoustics, and the low integer ratios of rhythms, related to the physiology of heartbeats and bipedal locomotion. Those are the tangible universals. The more important universal, however, is the intangible. Music speaks to us in a language that is only partly understood by others. Your musical semantics and pragmatics are different than mine. Your relationship with music takes place in a secret language known only to you and her. The secret chord is you, the product of all your life's encounters, every word or note heard, every thought shared or kept to yourself, every dream achieved or struck down, and that chord is on the move, constantly changing, communicated in a language and a dialect you can understand intuitively without ever having to learn it or take lessons in it. A conversation that is continually evolving. Check it out, everyone. Thanks for listening. I heard there was a secret chord by Daniel J. Levitin. Bookstores. Audiobooks. Thanks for listening. I hope that was cool. We'll see you soon. See you next week. Peace.